بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Honored and respected Imams, scholars, guests, community leaders, welcome, alhamdulillah, to our next session where we are privileged, alhamdulillah, to hear from a number of our teachers, scholars, and attorneys on a critical topic on prenuptial and postnuptial agreements in the pursuit, inshallah, of building strong marriages and strong homes. Inshallah, I'll take as little as possible of their time. We'll first hear from each of three speakers. Then, inshallah, we will have, after a word from our sponsor, the remaining time, inshallah, for question and answer. I'll introduce each speaker, inshallah, as they begin. We'll be starting, inshallah, with our honored Sheikh, Dr. Walid Basiouny, who is a senior scholar, mashallah, well known, alhamdulillah, to each of you in Houston and among AMJA. He gives fatwa as a member of the Permanent Fatwa Committee. For AMJA is the president of Al-Maghrib Institute, the head of the Islamic Theology and Ethics Department, and the Imam of Clear Lake Islamic Center, among many other responsibilities. May Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala grant him tawfiq. فليتفضل.
بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه بعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أولا أهلا وسهلا بكم في هذا الملتقى الذي بحمد الله وفضله يتجدد كل عام، وأسأل الله أن ينفعنا وإياكم به وأن يجعلنا وإياكم من المداومين عليه والمتناصحين في الخير. سأحاول أن أجمع بين تترجم الشيخ ولا أجمع بين اللغتين ولا؟ طيب. سأحاول أن أجمع بين اللغتين والذي يفوت يعني تترجم. جزاك الله خير. أولا أحب أن أنبه إلى أن موضوع لقائنا هذه الساعة سيتركز حول عقد النكاح وتوثيق عقد النكاح. وأنا أعرف أننا كأئمة كثير من الأحيان يعني ندرج على هذا العقد لأننا نفعله بكثرة، فأحيانا كثرة المساس تذهب الإحساس كما يقال، لكن ينبغي أن نستحضر في أنفسنا ونحن نقوم بهذا العقد أن هذا العقد شعيرة من شعائر الإسلام، وأن تعظيم شعائر الإسلام من تعظيم حرمات الله من تعظيم الله عز وجل. ومن آياته أن خلق لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا لتسكنوا إليها وجعل بينكم مودة ورحمة إن في ذلك لآيات لقوم يتفكرون. فهذا من آيات الله عز وجل، وهذا أمر ينبغي أن يقدر قدره ويعظم أمره وتراعى ضوابطه، وفيه توثيق لأعظم وأهم عقد يقوم بين المسلم وبين المسلمين، وهو عقد الزواج. بل إن الله عز وجل قد سماه ميثاقا غليظا، وكيف تأخذونه وقد أفضى بعضكم إلى بعض وأخذنا منكم ميثاقا غليظا. عقد الزواج ميثاق غليظ، ذلك الذي أحل للرجل المعاشرة الزوجية، وكيف لا يكون ميثاقا غليظا وهو الميثاق الذي استحلت به الفروج بكلمة الله، كما في الصحيحين من حديث النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: اتقوا الله في النساء فإنكم أخذتموهن بأمان الله واستحللتم فروجهن بكلمة الله. أحب أن أؤكد إلى معاني مهمة، وهي أننا في مجمع فقهاء الشريعة بأمريكا بخصوص هذه القضية بذاتها لنا عناية كبيرة بقضية الأسرة لإدراكنا لأهمية هذا الموضوع وحساسيته وكثرة المسائل المتعلقة به. ولذلك كان الحمد لله لنا جهود معكم طويلة وكثيرة في إنضاج هذه المسألة ويعني حل إشكالاتها من جوانب كثيرة. وفي هذه المرحلة نحب أن نؤكد على أو نقدم بين أيديكم مقترح وصيغة لعقد زواج شرعي يكون له الصفة الشرعية ويكون له أيضا الصفة القانونية التي يكون فيها إلزام، وهذا لكي نتأكد أولا من صحة هذه العقود التي هي من أهم العقود كما قلت. أيضا نسهل العلم ونوضحه لعموم الناس وخاصتهم كأمثالكم من طلبة العلم وأئمتهم. أيضا هذه المشاركة في الحقيقة كان الهدف منها ونحن نتباحث فيها هي قضية، نحن عندنا مشاكل كثيرة جدا حين النزاع والخلاف، لا سيما عند الطلاق بين الرجل والمرأة. ففي حين الطلاق فأردنا أن نوجد عقد يساعد الإمام وقبله يساعد الزوجين على تفادي بعض هذه الإشكالات وهذه المشكلات، أو على الأقل تحديد وتحجيم وتخفيف حدة الخلاف بينهما. فنظرنا إلى القضايا وهي غالبا قضايا مالية اللي يكون حولها الخلاف والنزاع، والتي تلجئ عدد غير قليل للأسف من المسلمين والمسلمات إلى اللجوء إلى غير شرع الله عز وجل والتحاكم إليه. أيضا نحن عندنا من أهداف المجمع هو الجمع بين فقه الفقهاء وخبرة الخبراء، فهذا يعني ملحظ يعني نرجو أن نتميز به، وهو الجمع بين ما عند الفقهاء من سعة ونظر فقهي وشرعي أصيل، أيضا يضم إلى ذلك الاستعانة بالخبراء في كل مجال. وفي هذه الحالة يعني عندنا خبراء ليسوا فقط خبراء في قضايا كلاهما محامي، بل أيضا ستسمعون مثل أختنا أبرار لها جهود طويلة أيضا في قضية الكونسلينج، أخونا يوسف له جهود في قضية الاربتريشنز. فهؤلاء ما جاءوا فقط من قضية قانونية بحتة، بل أيضا من معاناة وخبرة في التعامل مع القضايا الاجتماعية المتعلقة بالزواج. نحن واجهتنا عدد من التحديات حينما أردنا أن نقيم هذا العقد أو يعني إنشاء هذا العقد. أولا الولايات في أمريكا تختلف، وقانون الزواج وإيجاد هذا العقد يختلف، قد يكون من ولاية ولاية. مثلا بعض الولايات تلزم أن يكون المحامي يوقع على العقد حتى يكون قانوني، بعض الولايات لا تلزم بهذا، بعض الولايات تلزم بأن يكون الطرفين يوقعون قبل الزواج، يعني قبله بأكثر من يوم أو يومين. بعض الولايات لا تشترط هذا، فهناك اشتراطات مختلفة. فأردنا أن نوجد صيغة في الحقيقة يعني كفيلة بأن تستخدم في أي ولاية كنت. وأظن أن العقد على الأقل بصيغته القانونية الموجودة الآن بين أيدينا يغطي هذه القضية، وكثير من التفاصيل ستسمعونها من إخواننا يعني بعد قليل. أيضا هناك يعني صور كثيرة وشروط كثيرة قد توجد في العقود، تحديدها يصعب. يعني حاولنا أن نجد ما هي الأشياء الحساسة التي يكثر دائما الخلاف حولها ونحددها في العقد ابتداء، وإلا بالطبع سيكون هناك مساحة لصور مختلفة، وكما يقال customize يعني contract، يعني هو عقد خاص يتعلق بحالة خاصة وبحالة معينة. أيضا أحب أن أنهي فأقول بالنسبة لهذه المقدمة، يعني هذه الوثيقة هي وثيقة حية في الحقيقة، كما يقال live document، يعني قابلة للتطوير، قابلة للنظر. ونحن في اللجنة الدائمة للإفتاء المنعقدة في المجمع هنا عندنا بعض المسائل المتعلقة بهذا العقد قررنا أننا نعيد يعني نزيد النظر والبحث فيها من جهة فقهية، من جهة الصياغة، من جهة توظيفها فقهيا. سأشير إلى بعض هذه المسائل في العرض إن شاء الله تعالى. وأيضا هي وثيقة قابلة للتطوير من خلال ما يأتينا منكم من مشاركات، من إضافات، من إثراءات، من ملاحظات فقهية وعلمية وعملية تثري هذه الوثيقة. ففي الحقيقة أنا أظن إذا خرجنا من هذا المجمع وهذا الملتقى هذه السنة بإيجاد عقد شرعي ملزم أو صحيح يعني للزواج، سيكون هذا إضافة لجاليتنا المسلمة في أمريكا، لا سيما أن هناك كثير من الجاليات غير المسلمة من أديان أخرى يعني تخطوا هذه المسألة. وأنا أحب أن أقول لكم أنا أدرك أن هناك فروق بين بعض الناس. يقول لي طيب شوف الجالية مثلا اليهودية عندهم كذا. لابد تعرفون أن نحن عندنا في ديننا وفي أحكامنا الفقهية ضوابط وقيود قد لا توجد عند الأديان الأخرى. قد يكون عندهم من السعة والمرونة ما يستوعبون ببعض الصور القانونية اللي ما عندنا فيها حيلة. فيعني ينبغي أن يؤخذ هذا بالاعتبار، وهذا وجدناه فعلا إشكال أحيانا في صياغة بعض المسائل المتعلقة بالعقد. هنا يعني أحب أن أقول من أشياء شخصيا أنا لماذا تحمست لهذا الموضوع بزيادة. أولا لأن تعرض علي كثير من العقود التي رأيتها حين النزاع، وما أخفيكم كثير من عقود الأنكحة حتى التي أحيانا تنشأ بعض بلاد المسلمين يعني، وحضرت بعض العقود التي عقدت في المساجد أو اللقاءات، أتعجب يعني من النقص الشديد في هذه العقود من أكثر من جهة. قد يكون النقص في استكمال أركان العقد أصلا، والتنصيص على واجباته وأركانه. مثلا كثير من العقود التي رأيتها لا ينص فيها على مهر مطلقا. طيب من المهر يعني عند بعضهم يعتبرون ركن، بغض النظر اعتبرته ركن أو شرط أو واجب، بغض النظر كونه يخلو العقد من ذكر للمهر بشكل واضح هذا مصيبة، هذا ليس بالقليل. أيضا يكون المهر أحيانا وهمي لا حقيقة له. أيضا لا ذكر للولي، لا ذكر للشهود. أحيانا يكون الشاهد يكتب اسم بس ولا تعرف من هذا الشخص ولا كذا، وبعد فترة طيب مين هذا، أو وكلت ولي، طيب مين هذا الشخص، كيف تتواصل معه؟ ما في أي توثيق لهذه المعلومات في العقود الشرعية. أيضا هناك يعني ليس توثيق بعض العقود. مثلا الشاهد تسأله أنت شهدت على إيش؟ هل شهدت على رضا هذه الزوجة بالزواج من هذا الرجل؟ لا. هل شهدت على المهر؟ لا. ما شهد على أي شيء. يعني حقيقة الشهادة هي توثيق العقد وما فيه من مضامين. فكونك مجرد أن تشهد على بعض أجزائه هذا في نقص، بغض النظر هل هو كامل أم غير كامل، بس هذا نقص في الشهادة. المقصود هو التوثيق والإثبات. لماذا وجد الشاهدين أو شاهدي عدل؟ حتى يشهدوا على مضمون هذا العقد. أيضا وجدت أن هناك نقص كبير أحيانا في استكمال الأوراق المطلوبة. يعني أعطيك مثال، جاءتك امرأة مطلقة ثيب، كثير من العقود لا يوجد فيه نص وبند ينص على أن هذه المطلقة تأتي بوثيقة الطلاق. ينبغي أن يكون من ضمن الأوراق التي توجد في عقد الزواج وثيقة متى هذه المرأة طلقت، حتى نثبت متى انتهت العدة، حتى لا يأتيك رجل يقول تزوجت في عدتها. هذه وثيقة رسمية يجب أن توجد في العقد. مثلا هناك نقص لو في توكيل، لو أن الولي وكل شخص آخر يجب أن يثبت هذا التوكيل ويصبح يعني وثيقة دوكيمنت ملصقة بالعقد حتى يتم تثبيت هذه المعلومة. أو شهادة الوفاة، طيب يجب ينص في العقد أيضا على متى انتهت عدتها، حتى لا يكون. أنا حصل أمامي قضايا والمرأة تزوجت بعد ما استفسرت قالت لي أنا ما زالت في عدتها. طيب خلاص كل الحفل هذا ينبغي أن يؤجل ولا يمكن تتزوجين. ففي الحقيقة هناك في نوع من التساهل في هذه القضايا. حتى ينبغي توثيق وقت ميلادها وتاريخ الميلاد وحتى يعرف سنها وكذا. أنا أقول نحن لا نبحث فقط عن المينيمم، عن الأدنى المطلوب لتصحيح العقد، أنا أقول على استكمال العقد حتى يكون عقد كامل له حقيقة ثقله ووجاهته، ويكون في نوع من العدل بين أطراف هذا العقد. أيضا ذكر الشروط وبيان الحقوق، هناك نقص كبير جدا في هذه القضية. يعني أنتم أكثركم أئمة، أنت لما تيجي عند وحدة في وقت الزواج، الآن حيتزوجوا في الحفلة، تتوقع أن هذا هو وقت ستبين فيه الشروط وإيش شروطك عليه وإيش شروطك عليها؟ لا، غالب الناس لا يفعلون هذا. فحينئذ يكون فيه هناك حاجة إلى بيان أو حاجة مهمة إلى إيضاح هذه القضايا وتوضيحها للزوجين قبل العقد. ولذلك أنا أرشح أن يكون هناك دائما دورة فيها معلومات فقهية، قانونية، تربوية، استشارية، يعني لنجاح هذا الزواج قبل أن يأتون للعقد. بالنسبة للشروط هو أمر مهم ونافع كما قلت لحل كثير من القضايا. مجمع فقهاء الشريعة في وثيقة الأحوال الشخصية نص على اختياره في هذه القضية. فقلنا قبل ذلك في الشروط المقترنة بعقد الزواج: الأزواج عند شروطهم إلا شرطا أحل حراما أو حرم حلالا، للزوجة أن تشترط على زوجها عند عقد الزواج ما تراه أرفق بها وأقوم بحاجتها من المباحات التي لا تنافي مقتضى عقد الزواج، ومن ذلك اشتراطها استكمال دراستها أو بقائها في عملها أو لا يتزوج عليها أو لا يخرجها من بلدها ونحوه. ولها عند الإخلال بالشرط المطالبة بالفسخ أو التطليق، كما أن لها أن تحدد بالتراضي مع الزوج ما تراه من جزاءات أخرى بما لا يخالف الشريعة. إذا اشترط الزوج لزوجته ألا يتزوج عليها أو ألا ينقلها من بلدها لزمه ذلك، ويعتبر تنازلا منه عن حقه في التعدد أو الانتقال بها إلى حيث يشاء. إذا اقترن العقد بشرط ينافي مقتضاه فالشرط باطل والعقد صحيح. ألخص بس في 5 دقائق أنهي بها كلامي حتى أترك أكبر الفرصة للأخص يعني المتخصصين أو أختنا أبرار وأخونا يوسف ثم أيضا نفتح المجال لكثير من الأسئلة، لأن هذا يعني هذه المسألة مسألة مذاكرة، لكن فقط للتذكير. مسألة الشروط في عقود النكاح، الفقهاء جمهور يعني أولا نبدأ بالموقف الذي أخذناه في أمجا أو في مجمع فقهاء الشريعة، هو يعني أن الشروط يجوز في عقد النكاح أن ينص على الشروط التي لا تعتبر شروطا فاسدة. والشروط في النكاح ما يشترطه أحد الزوجين، ليست فقط الزوجة، لعلنا نصحح هذه اللفظة في العقد في القرار عندنا، أنه أحد الزوجين في العقد على الآخر بما فيه مصلحة للزواج، ومحلها ما كان في العقد أو اتفق عليه قبله. إذن هذا جزء من عقد النكاح. طيب في عند القانونيين حاجة اسمها post marriage contract، يعني يجعلون هناك contract أو عقد بعد الزواج. هذا أحكامه الفقهية تكييفها غير تكييف هذه الأحكام التي تكون قبل العقد أو في أثناء العقد من جهة زواج الفسخ أو التطليق. أيضا هي تنقسم إلى قسمين، فاسدة وصحيحة. عند الحنابلة أن الأصل فيما يشترطه الزوجان في عقد النكاح أنه شرط صحيح يجب الوفاء به ولا يجوز الإخلال به، إذا كان لا يحل حراما ولا يحرم حراما، لا يحل حراما ولا يحرم حلالا. أما الجمهور فهم يقولون باستحباب الوفاء. والذي اخترناه هو أنه يجب الوفاء، لأن الله يقول يا أيها الذين آمنوا أوفوا بالعقود وأوفوا بالعهد إن العهد كان مسؤولا. بل إن أعظم الشروط التي يجب الوفاء بها هي شروط عقد الزواج، لقول النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في الصحيحين أحق الشروط أن توفوا به ما استحللتم به الفروج. والنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول كما عند الترمذي وغيره المسلمون على شروطهم. وأيضا النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول من اشترط شرطا ليس في كتاب الله فهو باطل، وإن اشترط 100 شرط. فهذا يوضح أنه إذا لم يكن باطلا فهو ملزم. أيضا يعني الشروط كما لا يخفاكم صحيحة وفاسدة. طيب الشروط الصحيحة في النكاح مثلا أن لا يفرق فيها مصلحة ظاهرة، لا يفرق بينها وبين أولادها، لا تسافر من بلد، تكمل تعليمها. طيب فإن خالفها، هنا تنبيه، إن خالف هذا الشرط الطلاق ما يجب والعقد لا ينفسخ، لا، هي لها حق التطليق ولا حق الفسخ مع الاحتفاظ بحقوقها لأنه أخل بهذا الشرط. لكن لو جاء بعدين وقالت تنازلت عنها، خلاص أنا ما عندي مانع أسافر من بلدي، خلاص يمشون في زواجهم ولا عبرة بهذا الشرط حينئذ يسقط. طيب حتى لو تراخت، يعني لو أنها بعد مدة طالبت بإيفاء الشرط لها ذلك، يعني مثلا هي قالت أنا من شرطي ألا أغادر، وبعدين سافروا، وبعدين بعد ما سافرت قالت أنا أبغى أرجع لبلدي، هذا شرطنا، يجوز لها هذا لأن هذا الشرط طالما أنها ما أسقطته. وكما يقول عمر مقاطع الحقوق عند الشروط والمسلم والمؤمنون على شروطهم. أما الشروط الفاسدة أيضا العلماء رحمهم الله طب بعض الشروط الصحيحة قد يكون فيها خلاف، أنا مدرك ونحن مدركون للخلاف الذي يقع في بعض الشروط الصحيحة اللي اعتبرناها صحيح. مثلا لو اشترطت ألا يتزوج عليها، بعض الفقهاء يقولون أن هذا شرط صحيح وبعضهم يقول شرط فاسد، والصحيح عند التحقيق أنه شرط صحيح. هي لا تحرم عليه الزواج، لكن تقول إذا تزوجت علي هذا فيه ضرر لي فيكون لي حق حينئذ التطليق والفسخ. عرفت؟ ولذلك انتصر أحمد رحمه الله لهذا القول. على كل حال تبقى بعض المسائل محل خلاف، لكن في القضايا القضائية، في القضايا اللي مثل هذه تحتاج حكم حاكم يرفع النزاع. ولذلك نحن من أكبر الأشياء التي نود أن يعني نطالب بها في هذه الوثيقة هو أن يكون هناك مرجعية عند الخلاف للتحاكم إليها. ونحن نقترح أن تكون وثيقة الأحوال الشخصية التي قامت بها المجمع حتى يرفع الخلاف، وإلا لو كان بقي كذلك ما راح ننتهي. خلاص. الشروط الفاسدة كما يخفاكم مثلا كنكاح الشغار، أنه يكون لمصلحة الولي لا لمصلحة المرأة، أي شرط يؤقت الزواج كزواج البتعة، كأن يقول مثلا يعني أزوجك التحليل، هذا أيضا من الشروط التي يؤقت فيها الزواج، أو يعلق النكاح يقول أزوجك إذا رضيت أمك. كل هذه من الشروط الفاسدة التي تعود على العقد بالبطلان. لكن المهم أن ندرك أيضا هناك شروط فاسدة لا تعود على العقد بالبطلان. مثلا لو قال أنا شرطي عليك أن مؤخر الصداق 20% مما 20% مما تكسبه من أعمالك أو من تجارتك. نحن نقول هذا عقد فاسد أو شرط فاسد. ليه؟ لأن الصداق عوض، والعوض ما يكون غرض. 20% هذه إيش متى تكون؟ قد تكون مليون، قد تكون 100. ففي هذا غرر بين ما يجوز. أو تقول مثلا أن تعطيني كذا، طيب العطية لازم فيها التسليم وهي ما سلم، فهذا فقها غير صحيح. تقول تعطي مثلا، أنا عقد الزواج يشترط عليك أنك تعطيني 50,000 أو 100,000 أو نصف ممتلكات. هبة؟ نعم. طيب الهبة يجب أن تسلم، ما سلمت، هذا إشكال. فحينئذ قد يكون فيه شرط، فيه فساد، لكن هذا لا يلغي العقد، لا يلغي العقد ويجعل عقد الزواج باطل. مثلا لو اشترط عليه ألا يعدل بينه وبين زوجاته، أو اشترط عليه ألا ينفق عليها. طيب مثل هذه العقود فاسدة، لكنها لا تأتي على أصل العقد بالبطلان، والله أعلم. وأترك يعني المجال، هذا بس التذكير بالقضية، وأترك المجال إن شاء الله لإخواني وأخواتي يعني يتحفوننا بما عندهم. ويعني أرجو أن هذه الوثيقة هي طويلة شوية، ويعني لكن إن شاء الله يعني تتحفون بها وتجدون فيها مسائل ستعين يعني على حل بعض الإشكالات. يعني مثلا لو أن المرأة تشتغل، لو كان في العقد من البداية في الوثيقة الزواج إذا اشتغلتي، إذا المرأة كانت تعمل، فهو يقول في عقد الزواج إذا عملتي فإنه يكون عليك مشاركة مثلا بمقدار كذا من مصاريف البيت أو بمقدار كذا من راتبك، وتم العقد على البداية، يرفع النزاع لاحقا بينهم. ويعني أمثلة كثيرة ستأتيكم في هذا العقد إن شاء الله حينما يكون بين أيديكم، يعني يعين إن شاء الله في هذه المجال. وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد، جزاكم الله خيرا.
جزاك الله خيرا.
جزاكم الله خيرا. فضيلة الشيخ الدكتور وليد البسيوني حفظكم الله. Next, inshallah, we are privileged to hear from attorney Abrar who is a practicing attorney and served for 4 years as school board member at large in Fairfax County in the Washington, D.C. area. This is the first Libyan ever elected in U.S. history. She co-founded an organization providing thousands of underprivileged youth with free tutoring and mentorship at 20 locations and worked as a senior organizer in the political space. Attorney Abrar, please go ahead.
You can skip the slide. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. You guys are a little quiet, but all right. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa wala. Okay, so I guess, let me just make sure, okay. It's the tradition, of course, of Imam al-Ghazali that before you seek knowledge or receive knowledge from someone, that you have some understanding of why they're before you. Alhamdulillah, I've been a practicing attorney. I serve on several boards, including one on the American Bar Association. And in this space in particular, as Sheikh Walid mentioned, I've been counseling couples for families for several years, and mediate by certification of the Virginia Supreme Court. I also am a wedding celebrant, which might be news to you all that a female can do that, but inshallah, I'm repping my sisters, and inshallah with more sisters up here in the future, bi'idhnillah. And I'm also a student of knowledge, so I bring that lens into what informs this work. So we're gonna cover a few more topics. I'm gonna switch with Yousef and then switch back. But right now I wanna talk about some legal considerations that we're missing in Islamic marriages, particularly when it comes to the contract formation. So we're gonna cover a little bit of the distinction between the legal and the religious marriage after defining what those are, and then discuss a few scenarios that I'll be curious to see how you all conceptualize them, and then go through an analysis before we transition to Yousef's topic. Okay. So many of you all are familiar when you go to the masjid, then you get married, some imam marries you, or perhaps a sister, because that is not, there's no Sharia objection to that, who's certified, and they give you a marriage certificate, usually. The masjid will give you a paper, it'll have a writing on it. That's where you document kind of the mahar, the witnesses, their names. The wali might also sign that document. And that's the typical process of ijab and qabul, right? In your typical katib, kitab, or nikah, or whatever you call it in your culture ceremony, you'll have that process. Those are the religious considerations, right? And then we have that's according to the Sharia, we're good. Of course, there's the legal side, right? So many of you, if you've gotten married, probably most people in the room, know that you have to go to the court, you get a marriage license, then there's a process that only certain people who the state recognizes can sign that documentation and have it be sent back to the court so that you are officially civilly married, right? You're recognized by the state. It's one of your vital records in official state records. So that's what we think about when we think of a legal marriage. It has to do with kind of the civil courts. One other distinction I want to name, this varies by state. In some states, if you live as a married couple for many years, that's called a common law marriage. So actually, if you end up having a dispute, whatever, it will be, you will have already been, you can argue that you've been married because everyone around you knows you're married, because you've lived as a married couple, etc. You can prove it. And some states don't recognize that. Okay, so that's just an important thing to flag. That if you're not civilly married in some states, that can pose a problem. And you can run into that issue when it comes not only to kind of the property distribution stuff, which I know is a topic of whether or not we even engage on that level in the civil courts, and we're trying to avoid, but even in the healthcare context, for example, right? When trying to determine kin, or even, la samhallah, post-death, the way the government recognizes who's able to take your bank account, right? Like the rights over that and things like that. So there are legal reasons why that would be relevant, even if you were religiously married. And the court, not all courts, the courts, not in every state, will recognize that. Okay, so I want to name that first. That common law marriage doesn't apply everywhere. And the distinction I'm making, it's zawaj al-shar'i wa zawaj al-madani. Those are the two that we're talking about. Okay, so that's problem number one. Problem number two, I want to pose a scenario, and I want you to think about what would be your instinct and how you advise the community on this, all right? So you're certified with your state to officiate marriages. A young man comes to you, he's gotten to know someone from overseas for marriage. Things are getting serious, he's engaged, but he's worried that by the time he legally marries this person, he's gonna have to wait another 17 to 25 months with USCIS immigration to be able to bring her here, okay? And then he asks your help. So the question is, what would you do? Take a moment, really ask yourself what you would do in that scenario. Maybe we can have one person share. Okay, that's an option. Sure, you could send them overseas, say they want to live here, their family's here. A different visa? Okay, maybe that's not an option. What else can you do? Ask a lawyer. You know to ask that now, you know to say that now, but what would have been your instinct? Okay, so if you wait for the immigration, that means what? You're legally marrying them, right? So typically, this is the response, all right? I've seen this on the community level. What will happen is the imam will marry them legally, but nobody considers them married. The families, the community, it's fine, right? We'll just do the religious marriage when it works out, and that's the only thing that will be recognized. Okay, hold on to that. Scenario number two. You're certified with your state to officiate marriages. A young woman comes to you. She's engaged and she needs to book a date for her katb kitab or nikah, and you know her and you know her fiancé, you trust them. The masjid where she wants to do it requires her to have a legal marriage certificate before she's allowed to book a date to use the venue. And she asks your help. What do you do? Okay, you're giving me all the right answers. Bring a certificate from the court, which is what? Requires a legal marriage, right? So sign the legal paperwork and figure out the religious marriage later when we show up at the venue. This seems to be the instinct, all right, in our community. So yeah, do we do the religious first or the legal first? Legal first. Okay. All the right answers that I'm going to tell you why they're the wrong answers. Okay. All right, bismillah. So typically, there's this process called an annulment, right? What is an annulment? We've often translated it as fasakh. They're not perfect translations, which is something we can get into a little bit later. But nonetheless, it's like the marriage never existed, right? So you can actually go to the court and seek an annulment or a divorce. It doesn't have to necessarily be a divorce. So it's a legal nullity. The thing never existed. Generally, you have to get it within 2 years of marriage. There are a narrow set of justifications. So typically, each state has a list of reasons that are either considered void ab initio, so it's like the marriage never existed. For those who recognize the term batil, right? It just never was supposed to be. And then there's voidable, which is if you continue, it's fine, but if somebody objects, then you can consider it to not have existed. And the typical grounds are like you married someone when you were already married, you married a sibling or a relative. Those are void ab initio. Those should never have happened. Voidable is like there was fraud, somebody pressured you, somebody kind of forced you somehow, and other things, like you find out later that they had a child and they never told you, etc. So what ends up happening is lawyers are confronted with these couples who are legally married, are not religiously married, but what happened? It didn't work out in that gap, right? So now they're married on paper, they never got married Islamically, and they broke up. They're no longer together. So what we have to do is then we have to find procedural loopholes. Like, oh, did they write the exact correct address? Maybe they forgot to write the name of one of the parties. Maybe they wrote the wrong age or the wrong date. And you have to find these roundabout ways in case, maybe, if there's a mistake, if you're lucky enough, right, to argue in the court that this shouldn't be a valid marriage because of some procedural issue, because none of the grounds actually apply. You can't say they never actually meant to get married. You can't say that religiously they never got married, we don't understand this to be a marriage. That's not a legally recognized reason. And so you end up stuck, right? So this person now is married, but they're not married. And what ends up happening, and the process to get an annulment can cost anywhere between $500 and $5,000 in legal fees that this person has to invest to get that undone. So further elaborating the problems, right? So we have, which one first? Our community has generally recognized that you shouldn't get the religious marriage without the legal, right? I think we're on the same page about that. A, as an officiant, you can get in legal trouble if you marry a couple and they're not legally recognized. B, there's a lot of potential for abuse, right? People have secret marriages, whatever, all kinds of things can happen. There's also the inability to claim legal rights, as I said before. But we don't recognize the importance of also not getting the legal marriage before the religious marriage, or at least creating a large gap between them. Because now this person, if they're lucky enough to have a procedural error, has an uphill battle to fight for an annulment. And if they don't, which is more typical, they now have to get a legal divorce. So their legal status becomes divorced. That's the next time they file for a marriage license, that will be their second marriage legally, even though in their mind, in the family's mind, in the community's mind, they were never married, they never even, nothing, right, with this person. So I wanted to name that to make sure, and of course that's not to mention the stigma, the emotional pain, the emotional turmoil of not wanting to deal with this person anymore because of whatever happened that made you guys not even get married in the first place. And that leads to a lot of this discord that Sheikh Walid was talking about earlier, we're trying to avoid, just the issues that can cause amongst people. Okay, so that is the second problem I wanted to posit for our awareness, inshallah. So what's the solution? The solution is to be mindful that in the same way, alhamdulillah, most masajid now are very sensitive about doing the religious marriage before the legal marriage. We have to be mindful that the legal marriage also should not be done with a big gap between the legal and the religious. Because la samhallah, if anything happens and it doesn't work out, that can pose serious legal issues that we're not taking into account. And it's not really just, oh yeah, she can get an annulment or he can get an annulment. It's much more complex than that. Okay, barakallahu fikum. So I'm going to pass it to Yousef and we'll come back.
Jazakumullah khairan, Attorney Abrar. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you. Jazakumullah khairan. Next, inshallah, we'll hear from Attorney Yousef Jarudi, who's a practicing attorney of more than 6 years and currently practices under Jarudi Law, PLLC, with headquarters in Texas. Yousef is also licensed to practice law in Pennsylvania and primarily practices inheritance and family law and speaks Arabic and Mandarin. Yousef also conducts mediation and arbitration under his company, Jarudi Dispute Resolution LLC, where he co-mediates disputes alongside well-known scholars and shuyukh. Attorney Yousef, تتفضل مشكورا.
سلام الله عليكم ورحمته وبركاته. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. إن شاء الله سنتكلم بالعربية والإنجليزية. بالعربية. بسم الله. طيب. فأنا اسمي يوسف جارودي، محامي ومجاز بالقراءة والإقراء برواية حفص عن عاصم من طريق الشاطبية من الشيخ ممدوح اللي سمعتوا منه من قبل. بسم الله. فأول سؤال: ما هي شهادة الزواج؟ شهادة الزواج، وهذا يختلف عن الاتفاق ما قبل الزواج. أوكي. شهادة الزواج هي وثيقة رسمية تثبت ارتباط الزوجين شرعيا وقانونيا. So a marriage certificate, what is basically the marriage certificate? That is a document that proves the legal and religious union of the couple. Okay. طيب. And that is different from the prenup. And everyone here, we've been waiting to hear about the prenup. So here it is finally. وما هي الاتفاق ما قبل الزواج؟ هو عقد يوقعه الزوجين قبل الزواج لتحديد حقوقهما والتزاماتهما المالية. So it is basically a document signed between the couple well before the marriage. So as far before the marriage as possible. Now, has there been a prenup approved that was signed the day of the marriage, the morning of the marriage? Yes. In some states, yes. Texas, it's okay. It doesn't make it invalid as long as it's before the marriage. Before the marriage. What goes in a prenup? The prenup, it handles who will get what, right, on divorce or on death of one of the spouses. So on dissolution of marriage. طيب. And alhamdulillah, we're very honored. We've been working very hard with Sheikh Walid, Sister Abrar, Brother Sadiq. We've been working very hard, and we have come up with a product which is not only a prenup, but it is also, we have the marriage certificate. We call it the marriage declaration form, which Sheikh Walid, alhamdulillah, was talking about, and the shurut that you put inside of it, and which I will explore right now. But basically, we have the prenup, which you do it well before, and then we also have, alhamdulillah, working on the marriage certificate for your use, inshallah. وما هو الاتفاق بعد الزواج؟ الاتفاق بعد الزواج هو عقد يوقعه بعد الزواج لتعديل أو تحديد الحقوق. So basically the post-nuptial agreement is basically the same thing, but it is after the marriage, after the marriage. And it can be upheld too. So it's not the end of the world. If you did not do a prenup, you can still do a post-nup, inshallah. Okay? So here we have on the screen an example of the marriage certificate, which you're all very familiar with. And here we have just a small excerpt, a small snippet of a sample of a prenuptial agreement. And here's some more examples, as you can see. This, alhamdulillah, is the first page. Alhamdulillah, we're so excited to release this. This is the first page of the official AMJA document. Okay, Alhamdulillah, bitawfiqillah, we've been able to come up with this. And this is the first page. It's the disclaimer, the most important language. Yani, we're disclaiming responsibility for anybody's misuse. And then we have the next page. And this is a draft, by the way. This is simply a draft. It's not, we'll release the final one later, inshallah. The next page is the table of contents. For the table of contents, we actually have a document called Waiver of Financial Disclosure, يعني التنازل عن الكشف المالي. So before the prenup, you have a waiver of financial disclosure. So if you think you're going to get away with just doing a prenup just like that, you need to think again. Many states, it's not valid if you don't have this document. And that is because the courts, the law, does not want you guys making agreements without having full disclosure among the spouses. Yani, you need to, before she or he agrees on what will happen upon divorce, they need to know who owns what. They need to have a full understanding. This is his money and this is her money. If he didn't know that she had, mashallah, all this inheritance, maybe he would have agreed otherwise. If she didn't know, mashallah, he was a big businessman, maybe she would not have signed it. The courts know this. So before you even get to the prenup, to make it enforceable, we have included, alhamdulillah, التنازل عن الكشف المالي وثانيا الاتفاق ما قبل الزواج. Okay, so this, يعني, does that mean some of the spouses can hide assets before the prenup? Yes, because they're signing the waiver of financial disclosure, but there's a certain level of trust. Otherwise, the other option, don't sign the waiver, just sign the prenup, but everyone needs to make sure they disclose, they have a complete and accurate disclosure of assets and liabilities. Okay, so there's a lot of work that kind of goes into it. طيب. And so here you see both spouses will sign in the white box, and then they will get it notarized in front of a notary. And so obviously a lot of us know who a notary is, but if you go to the bank or UPS or independent notary, they will look at your driver's license, confirm who you are, and they will put a stamp. If the notary does not do the stamp and does not sign his name, then it's not a valid notary. They have to do both of that. And basically it's a witness, okay? So we witness both signatures. Okay? And so this here is the marriage declaration form, which AMJA has been working on, alhamdulillah. And this one is what you're familiar with. So it lists the bride's name, the bridegroom, the wali. This is Sheikh Walid, he brought up a very important point. A lot of people, they don't mention the wali inside of the marriage certificate, instead of the marriage declaration form. You need to mention the wali. You need to mention the witnesses. You need to mention the imam. So we have all of that listed here. Alhamdulillah. يذكر أولا أسماء الطرفين وبالطبع يذكر أيضا المهر. So if you can see on the right side, your right side, you have on the bottom half the dowry, the mahr, where you specify what that will going to be. Okay? And then we move on to the next section. The next section, يعني إذا كانت الزوجة تعمل يحدد أي مساهمة تتفق على قيامها بها في المنزل. So if the wife is working and they want to specify how much she will contribute to the house, in our declaration form, inshallah, you will be able to specify that she will contribute and how much, which percentage of her salary, or she will not contribute even though she is working. So alhamdulillah, Sheikh Walid has brought these things up to us, the common the common disputes that happen after, like during a divorce or الاختلاف بين الزوجين, and we are addressing it at the outset in the marriage declaration form, which is done in the marriage ceremony. Okay. We also talk about, if they own a home and the marriage is, there's a divorce, who takes the home, whether it's 50-50, whether it's everyone gets what they contributed. So this is very, very important. They might not have a home, that's fine. But in the event they obtain a marital home, this is how it will be. Okay, so this is actually very important. We also talk about cars and work and business and investments, الأعمال, والاستثمارات. So basically, all of that is addressed in the document as well. And then finally, we have indemnity language, which is the bride and the groom release and will not sue the sheikh. Okay, I'll put that in there. But bottom line, then the bride and the bridegroom and the wali and the witnesses and the imam, everyone signs it, and it is a complete marriage declaration form, بإذن الله. And now we're on topic 5. Topic 5 is that Abrar? Okay, طيب. يلا, Bismillah.
Can you just 1 second, Abrar? Just part of the contract, very quickly. في مثلا, one of the options is about in the case of the absence or cannot be reached, the husband, that she has the right to divorce herself. So some cases where he became completely missing, he completely out of reach, so many imams will find a problem of divorcing her, but if she in the contract, he agreed to give her the right of divorcing herself in this case, that can be an exit to make things easier. This is one of the issues that we're looking into, develop it more, but something that we would like to include. Also, all gifts that given during marriage, you cannot claim it later on. Khalas, you basically, and make sure that this is basically disclosed or something agreed upon. I can go back unless you want to specify, because that's a point of contention when later on upon divorce. Just, I think it's 2 points worth mentioning to you guys.
Jazakallah khair. Okay, and we didn't touch on the point of stigma. I think we can certainly address that in the Q&A, but overall, of course, this is at the end of the day, حفظ الحقوق. It's not any side trying to win over the other, inshallah, in any way. Okay, so the final topic we're going to address is the problem of lacking Sharia enforceability within these contracts, right? Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about mediation, arbitration, what's the difference? Then we're going to cover, inshallah, the last portion of the document Yousef was talking about that pertains to that. Importantly, the preventative measure here, of course, is to have to have these couples discuss these topics in advance. The research is clear on this. If you've heard the Family and Youth Institute, there's a lot of research on Muslim young people, Muslim families, and they've found that 80% of divorced couples have not done any premarital counseling, but there is a 33% reduction rate in divorce for those who have. So we know the data shows us it's significant. Many of you know that. A number of our masajid do that by now, and even in supporting the couple in that first year. So we see this as a preventative measure, and in getting them to talk about sometimes difficult, complicated issues like finances, sensitive things, we're not necessarily scaring them away from the step as much as we are trying to prevent what will ultimately be a delayed problem if it's not addressed earlier on. Okay. And I want to also clarify an important part, that we're now so focused on kind of the legal aspect and the messy divorce that we're trying to avoid, but none of this actually is necessary, right? So if somebody wants to have a divorce, it's not the case that it's necessarily an ugly court process or that they have to hire a lawyer or all of that. This is only when it gets to the point where it's become irreconcilable. The goal is to prevent having to hire a lawyer, right? The goal is to prevent having to even think about court. So I want to just reorient us, because I think that's often something we overlook, that this is an entirely preventable thing if we take the right steps as, inshallah, community leaders and folks who know better. And part of this this is my only place where I'll put in a plug a little bit, is reconceptualizing even the concept of marriage. So young people are coming in with a lot of baggage. Our society has made this very difficult. And even, subhanAllah, I'll humbly say, in some of the commentary today, these discussions around, the like what's so-called gender wars, right? Like you have feminism on one side, you have the red pill movement on another side, men and women having frustrations about one another on the whole, having to be defensive about trying to defend the Sharia territory for either side and being protective, as opposed to reframing all of it and thinking that this is about believing men and believing women being what? Awliya'u ba'd, right? Having those types of conversations where we're saying, no, in fact, we're not even gonna worry about having to work through the muck of all of that. We're gonna just reframe, take a step back, and think of what is the Islamic conception of this, where believing men and believing women are actually allies of one another, are actually people who are working towards the same mission together. And in securing their rights on paper, it's only honoring the commitments they've already made before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so having said that, what is mediation versus arbitration? Mediation is a less formal process. It is amongst an umbrella of things called alternative dispute resolution methods, ADR. It could just be, it's basically what's already happening, right? Somebody has an issue, they come to an imam, they come to someone in the community that they trust, and they try to mediate between them. There are court-certified mediators, as I was sharing with you earlier, but that's not necessary for that to happen. It's voluntary, couples can walk away at any time, and it's certainly less expensive than going to court for something. What's different about arbitration is arbitration, in particular forced arbitration, and that's what we're actually working on making happen here, is it is legally binding. So there's the Federal Arbitration Act essentially authorizes this to be the case across the country. There are some limitations, but those are only really in the employment context. So in the family context, you can be bound if you sign something that says you waive your rights to going to court in the case of a dispute and instead will be bound by an arbitration decision. So even if you do go to the court and say, hey, this arbitrator made this decision, I don't really like it, or I think that this is not fair, whatever, the court will actually send you back and enforce the arbitration agreement you came up with. Okay? So yeah, it is a form of adjudication, it can be compelled, it is a formal procedure, and it's still less expensive than trial. The other advantage, of course, is it's less structured, right? So you're not looking at, well, the laws in Virginia say blank, 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 and we have to apply them. The arbitrator actually has a lot of room to determine what those rules are, to set what those guidelines can be. And so then, what are we trying to accomplish? We've been able to work on a set of essentially what is an arbitration code, or what could operate as one. We've drawn on the family code that already exists in AMJA. Many of you all might be familiar with this. It's become a reference that Sheikh Salah and others have worked on for years and have put up, and it's actually available online right now. But we were trying to, we consolidated the most critical components that come up in marital conflict and tried to turn them into kind of more precise legal language that can be applied in an arbitration setting. So the goal here is you would go to an arbitrator. Actually, okay, before I move on, and this, I know many of you drew on kind of the Jewish example. Some of you mentioned it earlier throughout the day. Dr. Mamdouh specifically did. We're gleaning ideas, of course, from other good examples of what they've done. Inshallah, with the long-term plan for building something like this in the Muslim community where it's not only family, I mean, they even do small business disputes, etc. But having said that, so the vision would be, this is a portion of, this is the forced arbitration clause that is a component of the document Yousef was talking about earlier. This would be a setup where you're required to do mediation for 40 days, at least, so before spending anything on an arbitrator, etc. If that fails, then there is a process by which an arbitrator is appointed. That can look like an arbitrator that is mutually agreed upon by both. That can also look like one person names an arbitrator, the other names an arbitrator, and both choose a third arbitrator, and that turns into a panel of arbitrators where you present to them the issues, which can be all across the board, and they make a determination. And as I said, then that becomes legally enforceable in the courts as well, because you've already signed this before you got married. And this is essentially the code, just captures a number of topics. I want to make sure we clarify a couple of important pieces. It's similar to the disclaimers where there are what's called recitals at the beginning, clarifying. And really, really, I want to emphasize this point, ikhwani akhawati, because I can't emphasize enough. You can't just take this document, cut and paste, and implement. The law is intricate. There are many considerations. You can get people in trouble in ways that are going to be hard to clean up. And having said that, it's also critical to understand every line of what someone is signing, right? And someone has to be equipped. So we're not cutting lawyers out of the process entirely. It's going to be important to maintain them. And plug for Yousef, actually, who does this locally and works with Imams to support couples through the legal process and crafting prenups. So, and he has a booth outside, so make sure you check that out. But nonetheless, there's this arbitration code where an arbitrator, even the ideal will be that this is a Muslim arbitrator following Sunni Islam who understands some level of Islamic family jurisprudence. But there's a component on definitions. I was flagging earlier that I want to touch on this. I want to raise the challenge across the papers that were presented today. Everyone is using different definitions for different things in English. So inshallah, one of the projects that can continue to be worked on is really refining, like, is fasakh an element or not? Is batil really void ab initio? Getting to the bottom of the terms, but nonetheless, we define these various things, including, what is the idda, the time period, etc. It goes into property distribution, the validity of marriage to begin with, because people might try to claim that they were never bound by these rights or by these obligations anyway. It goes through basically all the core pieces, the sadaq, even components around children, the nafaqa obligations, the home. So you can see that it's a long document. But all of that will be a reference for that arbitrator to then try to apply the sharia as best as possible in a matter that is a qada'i matter, right? Like they have to actually talk to the couple, understand the facts, what's going on, what's the dispute, etc. So in wrapping up, the next steps from here are what? That the Fatwa Committee is going to be reviewing a few of the elements. Sheikh Walid touched on this earlier. We need to think about how to universalize some of these definitions in a way that becomes a standard application. So we're not all using different terms in imprecise ways that are not, they don't translate from the Arabi to the Western legal term. We also want to further refine this document and maintain the disclaimer again that I shared with you all. And then for Imams, inshallah, this can be a step. I heard that some Imams in the audience are already, which is wonderful, but most are not actually licensed to do arbitration in the state. But that's a step moving forward, inshallah, that can become an important tool for the states in which that's required. And then finally, my reflection that I want to offer after several years now of counseling young people in particular in the premarital process, there's this challenge of what has facilitated these gender wars, which set up the foundation for these conflicts to begin with. And that is, Allah yakrimkum, this is precisely your role in the community, is distilling and having the intellectual discipline and integrity to say, this is the deen and this is my culture. This is the deen and this is my personal opinion. This is the deen and this is what I think about gender roles and men and women and this is how my marriage is, but the deen may be something else or the deen may be something broader. And not imposing traumas, right? This is what's happening. We're bringing the traumas of young men who are frustrated that they're not married and young women who see their friends being abused and have frustrations and traumas from that and introducing that into the foundation. When really, bi'idhnillah, if we keep the nur of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with that intellectual discipline of really being precise about what is the deen and what is coloring the deen in ways that are acceptable but could be broadened, bi'idhnillah will help us mitigate a lot of the conflict that ends up arising and setting up our couples for more success. Jazakumullah khair.
Jazakumullah khairan to all of our esteemed presenters and panel. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring much khair and goodness, inshallah, from your works and make it, inshallah, a source of great benefit to our communities. Next, inshallah, before we enter the question and answer session, we'll hear from our sponsor, Human Appeal, inshallah, in no more than 5 minutes. So please, inshallah, come forward. Question and answer session. Please keep them short, inshallah, so we can take advantage of the time.
Yeah, I have a question for Attorney Abrar. It's a follow-up to a question I asked earlier. You mentioned one of the issues with doing the religious marriage first. You mentioned liability for the masjid. Can you clarify what is the actual tangible risk, considering that the religious marriage is not actually recognized at all legally?
Yeah, absolutely. So oftentimes in masajid, you'll have people who are registered with the state to do the civil marriage and at the same time, of course, do the religious one. In those cases, when they're licensed to do the civil marriage, if they do a religious marriage without civilly registering it, depending on the rules of the state, but for the most part, they can get their licensure revoked if that becomes a matter that comes before a court or is somehow reported. And in the cases where it doesn't work out, those will immediately be, the court will immediately be notified. So in those annulment cases I've had, it becomes a challenge where you're trying to keep the sheikh anonymous so that he doesn't get in trouble, but really the court can revoke their license. And that can come with permanent revoking also, which means they would never be able to officiate a marriage civilly again. And in different states, you might have also fines for that kind of thing, right? Or like legal consequences. It will depend. But yeah, at best, they could get their license revoked. At worst, they could actually face legal consequences for that.
From the right mic, inshallah.
Alaikum wa rahmatullah. Jazakumullah khair. Two quick questions regarding the prenup and the postnup. There are two areas we see a lot as well. One is the things to do with raising the kids. When we see marriages between Muslims and non-Muslims, or marriages when apostasy happen, sending kids to Islamic schools, for example, after divorce in case. And whether this can be included in the prenup and whether this is enforceable or not. When after marriages, raising kids according to Islam, or for example, the mother demands the kids to go with her to the church as they go to the mosque, for example. This is one area. The second one, the arrangements after the divorce itself. According to which madhab, for example, will set the hadana or this or that, whether we'll be able to define this during this process to follow specific madhab, or for a masjid or a specific imam or a specific institution to do this process. The second thing, if there are certain also code can be inserted there to guide the arrangement after the divorce. Jazakumullah khair.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So when it comes to children, right, you have to be very careful in the prenup. You cannot talk too much about the children, okay, because we have some court decisions where they invalidate that provision, okay? Because how can you contract about somebody who is not even born yet, right? What if the person is special needs? What you gonna tell me, go to church or go to masjid? You don't even know, like, what is the best needs of the children? This is the standard everyone goes by, the courts go by, the best interest of the children. So the less you say about them in the prenup, the better. And that leads me to your second point. You know, which madhab and what have you, do we go with arbitration? In the arbitration agreement, inshallah, it says, both spouses, listen close, both spouses will nominate one person. If they agree on the arbitrator, great. That will be the arbitrator. And he will use the AMJA family code. And it is attached. We have it as an attachment, the refined version. So that is the guideline. And that takes from all the resident fatwa committee, and they made, you know, they made that code. So that is what the guidelines that will be used, inshallah. If they don't agree on the arbitrator, then the two arbitrators will pick a third arbitrator. And then there will be a committee. Okay? And don't shy away from arbitration. Yani, I'm committed. If somebody has a question, I will, inshallah, help you through the procedure, whichever state you're in, yani. You know, do all the procedure for you or what have you. I'll, inshallah, assist you. And you can just come to me after this, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah. I know it's work in progress, so I'm just making a comment here that this will not only need guidance like from a lawyer, but it will also need guidance from a scholar, because it is pretty coded. It needs a hashia, like footnotes, or a commentary. One of I heard two of the conditions that were mentioned. One of them is the wife's contribution to the household expenses. That's not a condition that's binding. As long as they agree on it, it's fine, but it is not binding. If she takes it back afterwards and she says, I am entitled to nafaqah, to maintenance, she has the right to take it back, even if she stipulated it as a condition prior to in the prenup. But if they continue to agree on it, that's fine. So it's mutual agreement, in this case, not a condition per se. So maybe it needs to be color-coded, like some things are binding, some things will need ongoing mutual agreement. The other one that was mentioned is the, أن تجعل أمرها لها أو بيدها. So that also will need to be explained, because that is not the tafweed according to the madhahib, which they disagree over in the same majlis or in ongoing until he retracts it, because that tafweed he can retract it and it's after the marriage, and he can retract it even in the Hanbali madhab that extended beyond the same session. So this will only be limited, that the validity of this will be limited to the Hanafi madhab if he includes in the wording, if she includes in the wording of the ijab or the offer, زوجتك نفسي على أن يكون أمري بيدي. If she doesn't do this, check whatever marks, like you could check the whole thing, and it just doesn't stick, because none of the three other madhahib, Maliki, Shafi'is, or Hanbalis, will recognize that condition, and the Hanafis would recognize it only if it is included as part of the ijab. So all of this will need to be sort of explained, or like a commentary or a footnote needs to be added to the document, or a companion document.
Barakallahu feekum. Inshallah, we'll have our final question of the session from the sisters. I apologize to the other questioners that will be over time, inshallah. Our final question.
Assalamu alaikum. So my question is, there was a brother that mentioned that there was a, basically my question is this, and this question is for Sister Abrar. How, or is there a quick and easy way to verify a dissolution of marriage or a marriage certificate through the courts online, so that the Imams don't have to wonder, well, is this document fake or real or whatnot?
You mean a legal one, like a legal dissolution, an annulment or something?
Yes, just to verify that the person is divorced.
Yeah. Yeah. Most states, I want to say all, but I'll say most because I'm a lawyer. The marriage records, annulment records, divorce records are actually public records. In a lot of states, even to get an annulment, they won't even allow you to do it even if the parties both agree. You can come to them and say, okay, this guy and the lady agree, just annul it. They say no, because the third party here is the public interest. And the public interest to know this information also has to be weighed in this case. So having said that, the point is, yes, it is actually public record. If you do a background check on someone, that is something that should come up. Yeah, I think, that's something, go ahead, Sheikh Walid.
Yeah. From an Islamic perspective, when a woman or a man, or when they're a divorce, you have to document this. It has to be documented with witnesses. That's why the masajid have to have a certificate of divorce issued, as they do a certificate of marriage. And this is something we have to take care of, to document that this woman is divorced. This is if it's Islamically divorced. I need that. And if she doesn't have, she has to bring witnesses that she is divorced, or she have to bring the husband to me to prove that he divorced her in that date. So sometimes it's hard to find, but the burden on you to go get it, to get the person. You're going to be the one who really running around. So that's why you have to document the divorce and to document correctly if it's not documented in the legal system.
Yeah. Yeah, that
that's fine.
does
The
depend.
public record is public record. Yes, you can do that. But just very quickly, I just want to make Dr. Hatem, Jazallah Khair, he really highlights the complexity of this problem. There is so many things. We know we're not going to be able to solve everything, okay? But we will reduce the amount of problems, dispute through some of these points. Also, I just want to mention, Dr. when we said nobody talk about dropping the nafaqah completely, we're talking about specifically if she works, would she contribute part of her money and income to the household? But nafaqah wajib. But that's, another question. What if you retract that later on? But again, it will be, in this case, حق الفسخ أو الطلاق إلى آخر. But I think what Dr. Jazallah Khair had mentioned to you, how complicated this is with the variety of opinions. And I hope that this is something we can reflect upon. We appreciate the document that it is working. That's why we don't have it. We have a very good draft for now. So inshallah, hopefully, inshallah, by the end of this year, you will have something in your hand that you can use.
Jazakumullah khairan. Apologies to our respected questioners that we did not have an additional time, but if there's opportunity offline or in the coming period, inshallah, of the open discussion. So inshallah, now we will have a break until 5:30. followed by the open discussion. أصحاب الفضيلة الآن عندنا استراحة حتى الساعة 5:30 ثم نقاش مفتوح إن شاء الله. جزاكم الله خيرا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.